The paper ocean starts filling. 1990s seeds. 3 years after the Cold War ended, the Navy tried to shrink without breaking. The fleet drew down. The missions did not. Logistics still stretched from San Diego to the Persian Gulf. Money still flowed through thousands of accounts. To understand why a 2 a.m. call could rattle an admiral, we need to go back to the 1990s, when the plumbing under the world's most complex military quietly cracked. The stakes felt abstract at first. Spreadsheets, serial numbers, fuel markers. But for real people, supply officers, maintenance chiefs, controllers, every mistyped code meant a late part, a missed inspection, a ship stuck pierside. The Department of Defense promised modernization, then scattered its ledgers across service-unique systems. The Navy clung to legacy platforms, patched with manual workarounds. The new Chief Financial Officers Act demanded auditable books. The reality delivered fractured databases. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Cost-cutting collided with sprawling logistics. Commands were told to do more with less, therefore they learned to certify numbers that wouldn't reconcile. If a quarterly report refused to balance, someone made a temporary entry to push it through, planning to fix it later. Those temporary fixes developed muscle memory. A young supply officer in Norfolk would spend nights copying materiel codes from a green screen terminal into a Lotus spreadsheet, then into a separate maintenance tracker, then into a base-level accounting form. Each hop added the chance for error. Each error needed a plug, and plugging the hole became normal. Here's where it gets real. Imagine ordering a critical pump seal for a guided missile destroyer. The serial number in the maintenance system ends in 73. The inventory control point lists the replacement as 37. The financial system logs both, neither tied to a physical bin. The seal arrives late, or not at all. The destroyer's readiness report shows green because the request exited the queue. The deck plate chief sees red because the pump still leaks. On paper, money moved. In life, steel did not. What nobody knew at the time was how these little shortcuts would scale with war. To prepare for the year 200 bug, teams rushed code changes into brittle systems. Interfaces that barely worked in peacetime started to drift. A base moved to a new general ledger. The ship squadrons feeding it stayed on the old one. Data bridges tried to interpret line items that evolved faster than the translators. When reconciliation failed, unsupported adjustments smoothed the jagged edges. Pass the statement, fix it next quarter. The human moments tell the story. A lieutenant in Pearl Harbor held 2 binders at morning quarters, one with actual receipts, one with the official report. He knew they did not match. He also knew last quarter's variance had already been addressed with a topside adjustment. Push back too hard and your command rating suffers. Your skipper's evaluation takes a hit. Your career narrows. So he circled the gap, sent the email, and certified the status. Meanwhile, across the river in Washington, software contractors pitched enterprise resource planning as salvation. The Navy tried parallel efforts, pilot an ERP in one community, keep legacy in another. But every new module needed translations for thousands of codes born in the 1960s and 1970s. Fix one interface, therefore break 3 downstream reports. The result wasn't fraud, it was friction turned into fiction. When you can't make data agree, you make it agree on paper. This was the moment everything changed, even if it didn't look dramatic. Unsupported journal voucher adjustments, entries lodged to force accounts to balance without adequate documentation, slipped from exception to expectation. If a fuel receipt from a forward depot arrived without a matching funds site, plug it and move on. If a parts obligation double posted in 2 systems, remove one with a journal entry, even if you couldn't trace the original transaction. The intent was housekeeping. The effect was haze. In the shipyards, the haze thickened. Maintenance availabilities depended on itemized work packages tied to budgets tied to ledgers. When an availability grew, discovery work on a corroded seawater system, for example, funding lines got split across fiscal years and commands. One system carried the cost as pending, another as executed, a third as rephased. The carrier looked funded. The invoices lagged. To close the books, someone posted an adjustment. The steel waited. Get this, auditors started raising flags, but the language never reached the pier. Terms like material weakness sounded removed from wrenches and manifolds, yet those findings meant something simple. The Navy couldn't reliably say what it owned, what it owed, or what it had already spent. Commanders still needed to sail, therefore reports stayed green where they could. The pressure to meet readiness goals was relentless. The habit of forcing balance grew roots. Three things locked the pattern in by the late 1990s. First, leadership turnover. Every 2 or 3 years, new leaders inherited the same brittle systems and the same incentives to report success. Second, mission creep. Peacekeeping, no-fly zones, humanitarian ops, each with unique funding quirks that stressed reconciliation. Third, cultural triage. When the choice is ship the part or fix the ledger, you ship the part and promise to fix the ledger tomorrow. In the aftermath, the paper ocean rose quietly. It didn't look like crisis. It looked like progress reports, dashboards and certifications that let ships deploy while the back office played catch-up. But the ledgers were becoming a parallel reality. And when the money flood hit, after the year 2001 attacks and the rush to war, those temporary fixes would become the only way to keep the numbers moving. That's when the Phantom Fleet began to steer real ships. The software maze, systems that couldn't talk. While the paper ocean rose, the wiring under it frayed. The Navy tried to stitch together modern enterprise resource planning with decades-old accounting tools and service-unique codes that predated the internet. On a screen in a supply office, you'd see 4 windows open: maintenance, finance, inventory, and a homegrown tracker someone's predecessor built in the 1990s. None of them spoke the same language. All of them claimed to be right. Yeah, that's where it gets messy. A maintenance system closed a job when a work center clicked complete, sending a demand signal to inventory. Inventory issued a part and marked the bin down. Finance needed a matching obligation and a receipt coded to the correct fund, appropriation, and fiscal year. But the interface between maintenance and finance relied on translation tables that lagged policy by quarters. A code change at headquarters could take months to filter through. Meanwhile, the ship sailed. Fixing one module often broke 3 reports downstream. An update that made maintenance screens faster suddenly produced duplicate line items in the inventory ledger. The interface didn't know which transaction was authoritative, so it posted both. Finance pulled the feed, found totals out of balance, and did the one thing that guaranteed tomorrow's conv would sail. It inserted a plug to force balance. On the books, this lived as an unsupported journal voucher adjustment, an entry made to reconcile accounts without adequate supporting documentation. Now remember the tempo after the year 2001 attacks. 2 wars, urgent buys, new vendors, contingency accounts that lived outside peacetime norms. Interfaces that looked stable in testing buckled under the load. A clerk at a forward detachment keyed receipts into a theater system that didn't map cleanly to the Navy's enterprise resource planning. Back at the home station, the bill arrived stripped of the fields the general ledger needed. The result wasn't theft. It was a broken conversation between machines, patched by humans with deadline pressure and incomplete data. Get this, every system carried its own date logic, fund life rules and status codes. Maintenance said awaiting parts, inventory said issued, finance said unliquidated obligation, and the dashboard still turned green because one of the 4 boxes flipped to complete. When auditors traced the chain, they found gaps where the handoff should have been. A command would swear the part arrived. The warehouse would swear it left. The money would show movement without a clean trail tying dollars to a serial number in a specific bin. What nobody knew at the time was how many of these handoffs depended on people retyping from printouts. In a back office in Mayport, a petty officer read a dot matrix listing and keyed the numbers into a finance form because the interface script failed overnight. He finished the queue. He met the suspense. He also introduced a dozen transposed digits that would haunt reconciliation for a year. To close the quarter, a supervisor approved journal vouchers to true up the mismatched totals. Unsupported journal voucher adjustments climbed, not because anyone planned it, but because the plumbing leaked and the mission could not wait. Meanwhile, software teams sprinted. They patched application programming interfaces, wrote new translators, and pushed hotfixes that made today's report look sane. But the codes at the heart of the Navy's world, work center identifiers, material control numbers, appropriation symbols, were the product of layered eras. The 1970s met the 1990s, met the 2010s inside a single screen. You could fix the display and still have a hidden field carrying an obsolete value that triggered a phantom obligation 3 steps later. This was the moment everything changed in a subtle way. The ledger started telling commanders what they wanted to hear, not out of malice, but out of misalignment. A carrier air wing looked fully mission capable because the maintenance closeouts flowed faster than the receipts. A destroyer's fuel line showed healthy because the Enterprise resource planning rolled forward prior period balances when a port fuel receipt posted without the right fund site. "We'll reconcile next month," became the quiet chorus. Next month turned into next year. Auditors wrote it down in restrained language. Material weaknesses, lack of sufficient audit trail, inability to substantiate balances. On the pier, sailors translated that into late parts, surprise shortfalls, and Friday emails begging for screenshots to satisfy a control checklist. The habit set in: move the operation, fix the paperwork later. To make a report whole, you used a journal voucher. When the voucher lacked a clean chain back to source documents, it landed in the bucket everyone now recognizes: unsupported journal voucher adjustments. Meanwhile, across town, a different fix created a new crack. A performance tweak stopped duplicate postings, but it also stopped error flags from firing when an obligation lacked a receipt. The errors didn't go away, they went quiet. Quarter end arrived. The numbers did not match. So the team posted a balancing entry to close the books on time. The ship sailed. The ledger lied. Then the money flood hit with urgency purchases and split funding lines, and the software maze hardened. The Navy had built a world where the data bridges carried more traffic than the roads, and every detour ended with someone forced to choose: delay a mission or manufacture a clean number. Over and over, the choice was the mission. The costs would surface later as a ghost fleet made of numbers that never quite tied back to steel. Wartime velocity: Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Audit cliff, 2000s. 3 days after the first airstrikes, the purchase orders started stacking like sandbags. Urgent, 24-hour turns, shipped to theater with no time for the usual choreography. The mission didn't pause for ledgers. It sprinted past them. The Navy's supply chain shifted from peacetime cadence to combat velocity, and every brittle seam in the plumbing we just walked through began to split under load. Here's the stakes plain. When you're fighting 2 land wars and sustaining carrier operations, delays aren't paperwork problems. They're broken sorties, missed intercepts, and crews waiting on a part that the system swears already shipped. In the 2000s, contingency contracting became the rule. Theater-level systems logged receipts in deserts far from shipyards. Split funding lines tried to marry overseas operations with home station accounts that lived by different rules. And speed, always speed, overrode the ritual of matching every dollar to every document. Action flooded the decks. Contracting officers took satellite calls from tents, greenlit buys from vendors no one had worked with before, and prayed the chain would catch up later. At a warehouse in Bahrain, a petty officer scanned pallets at midnight using a handheld that didn't map cleanly to the Navy's Enterprise ledger. The serial numbers posted to a theater database. Back in Norfolk, the obligation showed up as a lump sum flagged, insufficient detail. The strike group turned the wrenches anyway. On paper, a journal entry would later smooth the gap. Meanwhile, field receipts came in waves. Someone keyed, received, to clear a back-ordered valve and get a helicopter back up. The part actually landed 2 days later, but the dashboard had already rolled to green. Finance pulled reports that couldn't find a valid fund site on half the theater obligations. Unsupported journal voucher adjustments began to spike as units force-closed accounts without the paperwork trail auditors needed. The intent wasn't to hide anything. It was to move, to sail, to fly. Here's where it gets crazy for the humans inside it. A lieutenant at an expeditionary support unit opened 5 systems to chase a single engine component. Maintenance said complete. Inventory said issued. Theater said in transit. Finance said unmatched. The ship at sea said, "We're down one." He called 3 time zones to line up a duplicate buy, knowing one of them would become an orphaned obligation the books would have to reconcile later. He also knew his commander expected a green brief at 80. He made the call. The plane flew. The ledger braced for an adjustment. What nobody knew at the time was how long this rhythm would last. Months became years. The temporary theater workarounds hardened into practice. Split funding became standard. Unliquidated obligations piled up because the last link, clean, audited receipt documentation, lagged by quarters. In a world where every hour mattered, the phrase, supporting documentation, sounded like a peacetime luxury. So quarter-ins arrived, and commands did what they'd learned in the 1990s. They posted plugs to close the books. Auditors later wrote the story in calm prose. Material weaknesses, inadequate support for balances, inability to substantiate transactions across systems. But on the ground, it looked like sailors rekeying serials from a fax because a digital bridge went down. It looked like a contracting officer accepting a delivery at dusk with a signature on a clipboard, only to discover weeks later that the scanned copy never reached the enterprise repository. By then, the operation had moved on, the unit had rotated home, and a controller had a deadline. Now remember the scale. Billions in obligations flowed through accounts built for steady-state operations. Every miscoded entry spawned a phantom twin or a dangling debit. Each demanded a fix. Unsupported journal voucher adjustments became the broom that swept the hangar after the sortie. The number grew, not as cash vanishing, but as the visible scar tissue of a control system outrun by a war's tempo. Meanwhile, a new pressure joined the chaos: performance metrics. Commanders needed mission-capable rates that signaled confidence to higher headquarters. The only worse sin than a broken plane was a red slide. When maintenance closed work orders to reflect actual fixes, the financial reconciliation often lagged. The reporting tools didn't wait. They rolled up whatever data arrived first. Green boxes multiplied even as the paper trail fell behind. Fix the fight now, fix the ledger tomorrow. Tomorrow kept missing. Then came the audit cliff. After years of crisis, tempo, Congress and inspectors general pushed harder on the promise of auditable books. Teams fanned out. They traced samples from statement to source. They found gaps you could drive a convoy through. A fuel receipt posted at a forward port with no matching funds site back home. A parts obligation recorded twice in different systems with no clean way to prove which one reflected steel in a bin. The response wasn't denial, it was exhaustion. Commands promised remediation plans. Software teams wrote bridge code. Units kept flying and sailing. In the aftermath of surge operations, the reckoning felt uneven. Some commands cleaned chains end-to-end. Others leaned on old habits and fresh justifications. The mission could not wait. But one thing crystallized: the Navy's books weren't built to survive a decade of emergency workarounds. The unsupported adjustments weren't a headline to argue on cable news. They were a signal that the tools guiding real decisions, readiness rates, inventory counts, cost baselines, were fogged. Speed demanded success, therefore oversight blinked. And when the tempo finally eased, the accumulated haze didn't clear on its own. It had to be burned off, line by line, voucher by voucher, in audits that would force leaders to pick between two uncomfortable truths: admit the numbers were cleaner than reality, or accept that reality had outpaced the numbers. That choice, the $21 trillion number, what it is and what it is not. Here's where the headline warps the truth. The $21 trillion figure is not a vault of missing cash. It's a signal, a blaring alarm, built from something dry and technical that quietly shapes real-world power: unsupported journal voucher adjustments. Think of a journal voucher as the accountant's wrench. You use it to correct or move entries so the books reflect reality. But when that wrench gets used without the proper blueprint, without invoices, receipts, or a clean audit trail, it becomes an unsupported adjustment. The number balances, the reality doesn't. To understand why this matters, we need one more layer. In the Navy's world, every dollar traces to a purpose: fuel, parts, maintenance, training. The chain should run from a commander's requirement to a contract, to an obligation, to a receipt, to a paid invoice, tied to a specific fund and fiscal year. when a link is missing, because a system didn't pass a field, a receipt didn't upload, or two ledgers disagreed, someone posts a journal voucher to reconcile the account. If the backup isn't there, it lands in the bucket auditors call unsupported. Those entries add up. Over years, they tell a story about control, not theft. Now about the scale. Economist Dr. Mark Skidmore went line by line through public reports, audits, Office of Inspector General findings, and financial statements, covering the year 1998 through the year 2015 for the Department of Defense and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. He tallied roughly $21 trillion in unsupported adjustments reported across those years. Not money siphoned away, not pallets of cash. Adjustments, paper moves, filed without sufficient documentation to pass an audit standard. Dry words, massive stakes. Why massive? Because those adjustments are like fog on the windshield. Leaders make decisions off dashboards that roll these numbers up. If inventory looks full on paper, but the path back to a serial numbered item in a specific bin is cloudy, you can't swear that missile exists where the plan says it does. If a fuel account closes with a plug because a port receipt didn't map, your cost baseline for steaming days can drift. Over a carrier's deployment cycle, that drift can hide the true burn rate that decides whether the next ship sails on time. Auditors have been blunt in calm language. They flag material weaknesses. The systems can't substantiate balances. The chain from statement to source breaks. Reconciliations rely on manual workarounds that leave no durable trail. Inside those findings lives the human problem we've been following. Commands under pressure to brief green, software that lags policy, and a culture trained to fix the fight first and the ledger later. Unsupported journal voucher adjustments are the visible scar tissue from that choice. Here's where it hits the pier. A submarine squadron plans maintenance windows based on historical costs and parts consumption. If prior year ledgers were force balanced with unsupported entries, the trend line lies. You budget tight. Discovery work explodes. Availabilities slip. Then the cascade. Crews extend, training compresses, and the next deployment window squeezes into an already thin calendar. On a map, it looks like a scheduling issue. In life, it's a missing receipt that triggered a balancing entry 5 years ago. What nobody knew at the time those entries were posted was how they'd warp readiness. When an enterprise system rolls forward a prior period balance that rested on an unsupported voucher, the illusion compounds. A destroyer's fuel account looks fine because the deficit was papered over last quarter. A munitions stockpile looks healthy because the counts reconcile to a number, not to serialized items you can put your hand on. The plan assumes steel that isn't there yet. Dr. Mark Skidmore's compilation forced a public reckoning. It didn't prove theft, it proved opacity. It said, in effect, the largest enterprise in the world can't show its work at scale. For sailors, that translates to late parts and uncertain timelines. For commanders, it means a green box that might be read the first time you open the casing. For adversaries reading open source signals, it suggests a gap between what the United States says it can surge and what it can actually move. And here's the knife twist. In a peacetime briefing, the difference is an annoyance. In a crisis, it's the lag that lets an opponent act while you wait for a clean picture. If you can't trace the dollar, you can't trust the schedule. If you can't trust the schedule, you can't promise presence on a date certain. And deterrence, the quiet math that prevents wars, leans hard on promises kept. So no, the $21 trillion isn't a pile of vanished funds. It's a yardstick of fragility. It measures decades where the ledger became a stage prop instead of a map. And every unsupported voucher inside that total is a reminder. When numbers stop tying back to bolts, O-rings, and bunker fuel, the fleet you think you have starts to drift into myth. Numbers are symptoms. Incentives are the disease. Now we have to talk about why people kept those dashboards green. Incentives, career risk, check-the-box culture.